Letters on the Water, Sharing My Perspective by Thomas Leigh.
Is there no spoon? Today's subject is the identity as a tool to gain experience. Previously, I described the identity within some visualization of a lake. If you have listened the very first episode of the Letters on the Water, you may remember that concept, that thought experiment in which I described a lake made of time and space, or in other words, a lake which in fact was nothing else than the whole space-time. And also I told you about the angler who came to that lake to fish. A form of a metaphor which represented so-called fishing of experiences. Being in that position, which in fact represented the spiritual plan and the timeless perspective, we could put it that way. Timeless perspective. Being in that position allows you to gain experiences, many experiences, from any time and any place. As you may remember from the previous episode, in that visualization, in that thought experiment, it is possible to decide to begin particular lifetimes on Earth, for example, located in particular time frame and in a particular place. And it was also possible, or it is also possible in that thought concept, to choose more than one single lifetime to lead. From that perspective, I remind you, from that spiritual perspective with no time and no space. And when I say no time, I mean with no linear time. So in that thought experiment, it is possible to lead or to choose more than one single lifetime to lead. And it is also possible to choose many lifetimes. Remember casting many lines while fishing in order to fish. So in that visualization, you can cast many lines, so to speak. You can pick many spots on that lake. And while thinking about what spot you would like to choose, you have always in mind that awareness that you have all time and space available for your command or at your disposal. So, as a reminder, in that visualization, one single line casted, one single spot which you have chosen, represents a single particular lifetime on Earth, for example. One single human lifetime on Earth. And the main character of that lifetime is formed as an identity, as a particular identity. With its characteristic features and so on. So when we imagine living on Earth, for example, on Earth, from that perspective, in that context, we can be aware that on one hand, it seems like our current life here, our awareness in terms of who I am now, my name, my profession, and so on, it seems like all of it is all about me. It is all about my whole being. But from the perspective of that visualization of a lake, you can be aware that this particular lifetime and you in a form of this particular single identity, all of it is only a part of some bigger identity. Or in other words, this is only a facet, one of many facets, one facet of a bigger part of a bigger something. Like I presented in that thought experiment before, I presented that bigger part, that bigger, higher being as a angler or fisherman, the one who came to that lake made of time and space in order to fish, to gain experience, to fish experiences. Of course, as a metaphor. But in that form, it could be quite or pretty easy to understand what I mean. So, having that visualization in mind, even on Earth, we can be aware that we can be a part of some bigger ourselves, so to speak. I can be a part, and I believe that I am, a part of a bigger, higher entity, which I call the higher self. The one who is fishing. And now, as another reminder, on one hand, from the perspective of this particular earthly lifetime, it seems like if I believe in karma, if I believe in reincarnation, it seems like my next incarnation should be located later in time from my perspective, this perspective. So for example, if now we have 2015, then my next incarnation should begin at some later point in time than this year, for example. But it seems obvious that my next incarnation, it wouldn't be logical if I would say that my next incarnation would begin in, for example, 1851, 18th century. But, as you may remember, from the perspective of the visualization of a lake, which I have described in the previous episode, from that perspective, it is completely possible to choose many time frames for your lifetimes, for your multiple lifetimes. Many time frames in the same time, simultaneously. Sitting near the water in that visualization, sitting near the water, you can cast many lines, you can pick many spots on that lake. And by that, you can begin many lifetimes located in many various time frames and many various places also. So in that position, with no time, no linear time, it doesn't matter that chronology. It completely doesn't matter. Because my fishing experience, so to speak, is happening right now. It is always now, and it is happening right now. I am fishing my desired experiences simultaneously in a form of many multiple lifetimes, many multiple lines casted. So if from that perspective chronology doesn't matter, back to the earth perspective, I can be aware that my my next incarnation, or all my incarnations are not restricted or limited by chronology, by that linearity, by linear time. I can be aware that my incarnations are not limited, in fact are not limited in terms of that linear time, in terms of chronology. And I think that it would be all in terms of reminders. But today, I would like to tell more about the identity. In the context of that picture, in the context of that visualization, still I will be referring to to that thought experiment described previously. Still, I will be referring to that spiritual perspective with no linear time. And I will present to you some of conclusions which are possible to reach when we compare that visualization, that thought experiment, with a single identity, single Earth identity, for example. So, how it could be when I think about when I'm thinking about this particular identity, a particular identity on earth, a single lifetime, like this one I'm leading now. When I'm thinking about so-called myself, I can see, for example, my character, my features. My strength, my weaknesses, my gifts, talents. Because over the time, I suppose that everyone is able to discover his or her own gifts, talents, predispositions. So I can see, thinking about my own identity, my current identity, I can see, for example, all those features. I can be aware of it. And as a result, I could describe so-called myself. For example, I could say that I can design. I can design websites, computer graphics pretty well. I could say that. I could say that I very like to record various things, like that one I'm recording now. I could say that I very like to speak, to talk. I could say that I love to eat and I love to cook, to prepare many various meals, to create new ones. What else? I could say that I love reading books. I could say that HTML language, it is a programming language with the help of which you can create websites. So I could say that HTML language is pretty understandable and easy for me, while the PHP language, which is another programming language, is hard to understand for me. And so on and so forth. You know what I mean? Someone else, for example, could say that she or he can paint pretty well, while I can't paint. Although I can design, as I have mentioned before, I can design computer graphics and I love it also. I don't paint. I'm not a painter. Um, hmm. Because I don't have that particular gift, that particular talent. So to summarize all of it, we could say that as identities, we have particular sets of features, or to put it another way, we could say that as identities, we have our own characteristic original shape. And by that shape, I mean all features describing us, who we are here, who we are here and now, our gifts, our strengths, our weaknesses, our desires, because this is also an important facet, our desires. We can often be aware that somewhere inside us exists something strange, which we could call our desires. Why I put it that way, that it is strange, that it could be perceived as a strange thing, because some of our desires we can only discover. We can't create it. What I mean by that? I mean that, for example, if I browse or view some clothing catalog, or maybe I'm just visiting some shop with clothes, I could choose. I could think about what particular outfit choose to myself, but there are some desires which I can only be aware of. I can only discover them. I can only become aware of them at some point. So, for example, as an example from my experience from this lifetime, at some point in time, I realized that my very intense desire, or maybe my biggest desire, was to live with my second half, the love of my life. And at some point in time, the only thing which happened was I just became aware that I have that desire. I didn't create it. I didn't think, for example, like, oh, I, uh, I want it. I want to be with my second half because it would be a good idea, a pretty good idea. So I decide um, to set my heart on it. No, it wasn't that way in my case. In my case, it was like I discovered at the time, I discovered that I have that desire inside myself. And in fact, I became aware of that desire pretty early in that lifetime. And over the time, I became aware of another desires. And I think that this is a process of gaining knowledge about myself when is the proper time. In the proper time, there are some points. I believe, I think, I perceive it that way, that there are some points on our path in which we become aware of ourselves more, or in which we know ourselves more. We are getting more knowledge about ourselves at those points in time, located somewhere on our path. So I think that some of our desires existed always inside us. There were always in us. They were always present, but we weren't aware of them all the time, because it was needed to reach the time, the proper time. The proper timing was necessary in order to become aware of some particular desire. But, I think it is simple to say if a particular desire belongs to that kind of desires which we can only be aware of, which we can only become aware of. Because it is simple, it is obvious that it is simple to determine if a particular desire was created consciously by myself. Because if I created anything consciously on that plan, if I created anything consciously, it's obvious that I am aware that I did that. But sometimes I can get up and suddenly I can be aware out of nowhere that I desire something. It is completely possible to wake up one day and become aware of some particular desire, some particular dream. And I suppose that the biggest dreams of our life, we are aware of them for a long time. We can discover them very early. And I believe we in fact did it that way. We in fact discover them very early. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have that feeling that in terms of the biggest dreams, the biggest desires, they emerge very early or quite early in our lives. Emerging in the light of our awareness, consciousness. When we become aware of them, when in our life, when in our life, when I became aware of my desire to live with my second half, you could say that I was a child. So, back to the point, back to today's subject, the identity, which now I think I will split that subject to couple parts rather than a single recording. But back to the point, the identity. I could say that we all have our shape in terms of identity. And as a reminder, as that shape, I mean our features, our strength, our gifts, our weaknesses, our desires, and so on and so forth. So all of it we could put into one single term or one single box, a shape. Our shape of our identity, shape of my current identity, and shape of your current identity on Earth, for example. Very characteristic, unique, your own shape. And now, the major question would be, has that shape a purpose? Because there are two possible ways to perceive that subject. One way, I could think that that shape is nothing important, in fact. It's rather a random thing. And the other way I could perceive that subject is, I could say that that shape is my destiny. That shape has its own purpose. That shape exists on purpose. And I personally believe that way, that our shape of our identities have its own purpose, exist on purpose. I believe that our shape was created from that higher perspective, higher spiritual perspective. I believe that that shape has been created on purpose, intentionally. Back to that thought experiment, that visualization, fishing of experiences. When being that entity, I want to gain some experiences. I need some tool or tools in order to achieve that goal. Why I need tools? You know, I like to compare it to the situation in which we are visiting some restaurant. We want to eat, to have some tasty meal. So we are going to visit some restaurant, or maybe we love to cook by yourself, by ourselves. Maybe we love to cook by ourselves, so we just decide to prepare some delicious meal in our own kitchen. And now, in order to eat that meal, we usually need some tools, like spoons, for example, or forks. So if my desire is to eat soup, I need a spoon, but I could choose some other meal. And in that case, I could need a fork. And it seems obvious that I won't choose a fork to eat soup. I need the very particular tool, which in that case is a spoon, in order to eat my lovely soup, which I desire to do, which I desire to achieve, I could put it that way. Gain experiences. You could imagine that gaining experiences in a form of eating, eating meals you desire to experience. And in order to eat them, you need some particular tools, because it wouldn't be so effective to eat a soup with the help of a fork. It wouldn't be so effective and comfortable. So, back to experiences, gaining experiences. In order to gain your desired experiences, you also need, as a higher being located in a spiritual plan with no linear time, you also need some particular tools shaped in a very characteristic, intentional form, way. So, very simple example. If from that spiritual perspective, my desire is to experience a life in which I will be, or in which I will give many speeches. In order to achieve that, I need to have some particular skills. For example, I could be in the need of having a gift, the ability to feel comfortable in front of a large audience. large amount of people. I can't be shy. I can't be paralyzed. I need to be able, I have to be able to speak in that position in front of large amount of people. I have to have that skill. And also, I need to have the ability, the skill to perform speech, to perform my speech. I need to know how to do that kind of thing. I need to have that gift, so to speak, in order to give what I want to give to the people, to my audience. In order to give them what I want, I need to have a particular skill. If my desire is to be a painter, I also need to have that skill. I need to have that talent, that gift to paint. Because as we know, not everybody is able to paint. Not everybody has that gift to paint, to compose some music, and so on and so forth. I think you already know what I mean, what is my point here. In terms of a shape, the shape of our identity. Back to that spoon and fork matter. When I want, from that spiritual perspective, when I want to gain some particular experience, I need some particular tools. And those tools are nothing else than identities, characters, features, made of features, several features, set of features, particular characteristic, unique features, composed before, created before entering life, entering a single incarnation. I perceive it that way, that we not only choose where and when to live, but we also choose in what form. Because often, if not always, the very essential purpose of our life is to gain some particular experience. And I perceive our own identity as that tool to gain that experience I desire. That experience I desire on a spiritual, higher plan. So knowing what I desire, I can compose, I can create my tool, like that spoon which I need to eat my soup. I create the tool, and when I have that tool completed, I cast this particular line, so to speak, in that lake. And by that, this particular lifetime begins with that tool I've just made. So you can see that from that perspective, it has a lot of sense. Our whole life, who we are, our shape, has a lot of sense. From the very beginning, we, in my opinion, have that sense encoded, so to speak, within ourselves. Because we, on Earth, for example, exist in a form of identities, we could say that we, in that form, in that particular form of identity, we are our own tools. We are our own tools made on purpose. And the purpose is to gain particular experiences. So the main conclusion out of that knowledge, out of that way of perceiving that subject, the main conclusion for me is my shape is my destiny. Who am I? My strength, my weaknesses, my gifts, my desires, which I am aware of now or which I am not yet aware of, all those things exist on purpose and has been created before I even entered that body. I believe that all those things has been created, prepared before like you you think what to put into your backpack when you are going to go on some trip, begin some journey, voyage, or something like that. My shape is my destiny. Who am I is my destiny. And this is very important for me, that way of perceiving ourselves. Why this is so important? I will answer that question on the next episode of the Letters on the Water. I am Thomas Leigh. Thank you.
Letters on the wall, slowly, 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 for you. By Thomas Leigh.